Looking for fantasy impact in the NFL free agency period, and we sure got it with one Mr. James Conner. That more this week on the Footballguys Dynasty Show. And Jordan, here we are. James Conner stealing jobs last year, longtime NFL starter, and looks like he's going to be one again in 2022 and maybe even beyond that.
Yeah, what a turn of events. I mean, late day 2 pick, 2017. He gets that big opportunity once Le'Veon Bell it does his deal with his holdout, and then he has the huge season in 2018, kind of fizzles out and ends up signing a really minimal contract last year, ends up leading the league in rushing touchdowns, and produces a running back 6 finish on only a running back 5 finish in only 15 games, average 17.7 points per game. Get him locked in. It looks like it's probably going to be, pretty good, at least a 2-year window for him. I don't think it necessarily rules out that they add someone, but it probably becomes a much lower priority for them in terms of adding someone else, whether it be an injury away guy or whatnot. But really clearing the deck of Chase Edmonds, that's good. In a situation that yielded the second most rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line last year, and turned into 10 rushing touchdowns inside the 5. So really lucrative opportunity. And let's not forget, he had 50 plus catches in a season before. So he can do both, right? There's a lot of leeway here in his profile. And I really like this for him. I think it's really going to vault him up in terms of where we think about him in Dynasty.
Yeah, I think, we have someone like James Conner, a couple of top 10 finishes in his career. It's interesting because I do a very macro approach of career arc and what did they recently do and profiling. And this is independent of what I think the NFL and free agency will do or new contracts, future depth charts, all those things. But Conner is and the most recent example of how good production, good profile finds you. It finds you opportunities. Leonard Fournette is another one. We'll see if he goes back to Tampa Bay, but he's been one that has paid dividends the past couple of years. The same sort of thing. Productive, prototypically sized 3-down player that they end up finding roles for longer than you might think, deeper into their 20s. And Connor's one that I'll tell you, after we see Chase Edmonds go away, Conner come back and on a substantial deal that looks multi-year in construction and utility for Arizona. And Conner, he's a really interesting one because there's so many backs right now that are 26, 27, 28 years old, productive profiles. And I think how value that, and I think it might differ in an existing league versus how early you might take them in a startup draft. But these could be centerpiece producers this year, as you outlined with a lot of Conner's upside.
Yeah, and the other thing, too, that I think is interesting, like if you're looking kind of in that existing league, this is one that you may not have to trade a first to get him, depending on what your marketplace is. If you do it for a second, maybe include some other players, something like that, and really get a difference maker, kind of like Fournette. I mean, they're a little bit further along. I don't know how people are really going to think about them in the versus the 2023 class. I don't think you're going to draw a ton of first round pick swap type valuations for them. I think it's but I have him in a number of spots, right? I have Fournette, who's the other big shoe to drop, really. I mean, that's, him and we can make a whole story out of the fact that Allen Robinson, Juju Smith-Schuster, Jarvis Landry are still out there while Christian Kirk signed this mega crazy deal with Jacksonville. I mean, how about in a world where Amari Cooper was going to get paid $20 million and Dallas was concerned about that? It's actually Christian Kirk making the same amount. And you're like, wait a second. the Amari Cooper deal that we
Spider-Man, looking at Spider-Man, exactly.
the deal that we did 3 days ago, it looks a lot worse now, the fact that Christian Kirk's value is as much or more, depending on how you measure it. So
Dallas is we'd rather pay half the price for Michael Gallup, right?
Right. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, there's still a lot of shoes to drop, which is interesting. And I mean, I think the biggest story of the past week has probably been Watson, and and how he sort of fits in all of this. It looks like we're probably, we're recording this Tuesday night. If you listen to us Wednesday night, right, this might be stale news. It might lead our topic next week. So, but yeah, I mean, there's just so much still fluid that's moving. But to see James Conner land, a guy that we liked, one of the best, he's going to go down as one of the best round 3 rookie picks of all time. And I think that's a really notable thing.
Well, and he's just a glaring beacon example of, I remember taking him late second generally, and you just say, hey, situation, who knows? It's an Alexander Madison type situation of he's behind an established starter. How long does he wait? We're seeing also, it's a different pedigree, but we're seeing Tony Pollard be an example of not, just rolling snake eyes over and over again for potential opportunity. We've seen Madison roll, 5, a 9, and we've seen James Conner roll a 7. Absolutely got the right draw there with Le'Veon Bell 1 year and then out, and it's Conner's show, and he's pretty much been viable on a weekly basis since. So that's just an example of how these day 2 or early day 3 running backs with some profile can operate opportunity-wise, and that's why you just take all these shots because, and you always say, a hand grenade because I remember us talking about a trade for Deshaun Watson in one of our leagues together last summer, and this was a plan, a macro plan of, it might be 2022, it might be 2023, it might have been 2021. We had no arrival date, and frankly, we still don't technically have the first game Watson is going to play. James Conner works the same way, right? I mean, if you, at worst, you figure he's going to be an injury away guy that can blow up any given week with an opportunity. We saw him do that and then some last year, actually just take the job. And now it looks like it's his job. He earned it yet again for a second team. But Deshaun Watson is sort of the same thing, especially in premium formats where we thought, hey, we could take a rookie quarterback or we could take Deshaun Watson and just kind of sit on it and say we're making a move for the macro of our team. And I think these other NFL teams are doing the same sort of thing with Watson. They would be doing something for the, he might miss part of the season this year, or we're giving up all these picks, but it's mystical, right? I mean, we gave up Justin Fields essentially, and we said we don't know what Justin Fields is going to be. But we said 1 extra year, a rookie season of Justin Fields is probably not worthwhile enough to pass on Deshaun Watson, where we know what he is. We know what he's done on the NFL. It's so hard to get that right. But I just think, running back, we probably don't give him enough credit for that productive profile of saying they've been there, done that, all the way back to Pitt in college with James Conner, of saying he's been a starter, he's been a two-way producer, he's got prototypical size. And how about you soften he runs a 4.6 whatever, because that you can run a 4.3 and still not know what you're doing. So you can burn bridges and not pass protect and get your quarterback blown up and you're on the bench. So it doesn't matter how fast you run. Go gun punts. That's what they're going to tell you to do. So I just think there are some parallels here, but we are looking for those players that can blow up. And Watson might be around the corner. Connor's certainly one of those players the past few days.
Yeah, and one other thing with Conner that's pretty cool. I mean, by NFL standards, he hadn't really made that much money. He made less than $5 million through 5 years. And considering he had 2 top 6 seasonal finishes on his resume, I mean, that's a huge discount on really
life as a non-round 1 running back, right? I mean,
I know.
We lament about and these teams lament about Saquon Barkley, but there's a lot more James Connors out there that are you start taking half of that away, and it's like through 4 or 5 years they haven't made all that much. So all right, so another one I wanted to bring up is Evan Engram. So Evan Engram is one that, man, it's been a tough watch, and you mentioned there's a 4 or 5 other highly notable names still out there in free agency, and Evan Engram hung out there a while. He took a 1-year deal. This is Juju Smith-Schuster like, and man, he goes to Jacksonville. They're putting together a lot of pieces. You mentioned Christian Kirk. I just wonder if do you think this is Evan Engram, who now is tight end 20s, somewhere in there? Is there enough juice on this upside-wise from Jacksonville, from Evan Engram, to get you reinvigorated in the profile that's pretty much been on the mend for a couple of years now?
I mean, just hope that he recovers from his rookie season, right? Where it was really good his rookie season and then has basically stagnated since then and dropped and stagnated since then. I listen, to go to a Doug Peterson offense where they have had success with tight ends, with Goedert, with Zach Ertz back from Philadelphia. I actually think it's really interesting. I think Jacksonville this year has basically become the Patriots from last year, which is just invest a ton around what ended up being a rookie quarterback. I don't know if they knew that at the time, but did a ton of investment, even in guys that we might not necessarily have liked. And this is basically the Jacksonville version of it. And it's funny because they're paying less for Evan Engram than New England paid for Jonnu Smith. And I like the upside of Evan Engram quite a bit more than I like of Jonnu Smith. So, yeah, I mean, it's interesting that his is sort of almost in line with what the franchise tag was of some of the other guys like Gesicki and stuff. And when you look at some of the advanced metrics, that actually shows up, which is wild. So, yeah, I mean, he's one that I think is going to be, it's a prove it deal for him, a prove year. And I think he could rebound, hopefully. I mean, we have enough shares of him on our teams that it would really help. So hopefully this new situation is better. But, I mean, no more excuses for Trevor Lawrence. I mean, it's got to, like, you don't have any more excuses, right? You don't have any more excuses. You have a lot more weapons. You've got a huge investment around you, right? You're getting all the bumps that a rookie quarterback should get because you have all this contract relief. You don't have any excuses now, like coming into the season.
And let's hope his week 18 against the Colts is a sign of things to come, because he certainly put it together for one game, and you kind of saw glimpses of what he could do again with that classic fresh start moniker here for the Jags. And they certainly need one, but like you said, I mean, there's lots of expectations now for probably Christian Kirk in terms of the contract he got, but also with Travis Etienne coming back from injury. Evan Engram obviously is a reclamation project after some early production with the Giants there. So remind you, as the Football Guys Dynasty Show with Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara, episode 95. And you want to pick up the daily email update from Joe Bryant. This time of year, I want to let things, I mean, I'm checking multiple times a day. Twitter is a good resource, but you know what the catch-all is? It's the daily email update at Football Guys. It's going to be the end of every day, whether you have it first thing in the morning when you get up or before you're going to bed. But it's got links to articles coming out. You just had one that was featured as well, going over some things to watch for this offseason. But we are not done. You know, we're going to have running backs, and you mentioned Deshaun Watson, a number of other players still out there. Today, Tuesday, was a bit of a light day. Monday, was the main day, but it seems like now Monday is that main day, and you got to be on it from lunchtime on, and certainly that was the case. Again, the Football Guys daily email update, the right side of the Football Guys homepage, because your league mates have it and you don't. You are just falling behind in your dynasty leagues. So let's talk about some dynasty trades. FFPC super flex, and one name that's been in the news a lot is Mr. Tom Brady. He's back, and with the season he last had, it's not hard to believe that he's coming back saying I can take all these kids down. He's in the NFC, so he obviously has a little bit of advantage to win this division. We'll see about Deshaun Watson. Maybe he's joining the division, but this is Tom Brady, deemed not a serious contender in Superflex for Rashad Bateman. Jordan.
I mean, I would question, it's March. How do you not know you're a serious contender, right? How do you, I mean, you just got back Brady. I mean, do you know that for sure, right? That would be the first question I would ask yourself. And especially if you had Brady last year and you didn't trade him, are you sure you're not a team that can contend this year? That would be because you just had this gift on your lap of another Brady season. That would be my first threshold question. I think the value is probably about right. My question would be, can you make a better deal at some other point for a better asset? Can you make, Bateman's fine, but I have a bunch. I don't think he's any sure thing to be a future starter. And if you're giving up a Brady asset right now, you're giving up a quarterback slot, right? You can't make an upgrade for someone that gets hurt later on. So all those things, I mean, I kind of lean on, let's hold on to the Brady side, even if it's fair value, because I think at some point later on, you can actually make a better deal from the Brady side, because it's a quarterback slot, right? And if you just give it away for Bateman, I think there's a premium there that you should pay. And I don't think you've gotten this. So I would hold on to the Brady side at this point.
Yeah, even if you're strong at quarterback, I think you've got to get better. You've got to get more. And Bateman is a risk, because you're talking about shallow. And that if Bateman is your wide receiver 4, 5, 6, and he's not he ends up not being lineup viable. That's really tough in FFPC. So just keep that in mind. And this is before the deadline to reduce your rosters at the end of March. So I just don't think, even if you're heavy at quarterback, that Brady is one that you just siphon away for something else. So we've got that is FFPC Superflex. Doesn't have the quarterbacks straight out. We do have a rookie pick involved. We've got Saquon Barkley and a third for Keenan Allen, Ramondre Stevenson, and 111.
This is interesting because you're consolidating up, right? You're facing a major cutdown issue and pivoting up. I mean, this is a shot for an elite outcome with Barkley, right? If you still believe that, I think that's kind of what you have to hope for with this. Because I like Keenan Allen still has plenty of he still has plenty in the tank. I mean, we like Ramondre Stevenson as a glorified injury away guy. The pick, I'm not sure how super valuable it's going to be. I think Barkley's the best asset in this. I mean, I'm guessing you would take him because I think you're higher on Barkley's overall ceiling than I am. I'm leaning the Barkley side on this, even though I might make a little bit of tinkers along the way.
Yeah, I like Keenan Allen. I wouldn't be surprised if Keenan Allen matches Barkley in production this year, but I think one concern is what you said, which is if Stevenson is near your cut line, you probably want to use him for something because you can find other backups, and to say that Stevenson is overtly better than all the other guys that might be available or you already have, I don't think you can value him a lot. And then 111, again, if you already are facing cut down problems, I mean, how's it going to get in August? So I'm not saying you cut your 111 pick, but the point is you're razor close. So I don't think you can value those heavily. So this is closer than a 30-man roster, Keenan Allen for Saquon Barkley type deal. It's almost straight up-ish is kind of how I view it. So I think you kind of have to take Barkley in that swing at the big potential, even if Allen is a better chance to hit a double or triple.
Right. We played in a league where it was a similar type deal where it was Nick Chubb for Keenan Allen and a pick. Right. And I think it was either the league you and I are co-GM or that same format that I play in, where it's two quarterbacks, a bunch of tight end premium stuff. And it was a couple of years. It was, I think, last year that I made that deal. And when you actually looked at it, it was all right. It was a better class, right? There was more premium. So you're getting a better shot at some different players, some different positions there as well. And it was a deeper roster, right? So it was a similar type of construct, similar type of value. But the format makes you play the game a little bit different. So I'm kind of with you on that.
Next one, we got some tight end premiums coming into play. Again, super flex, but 2 PPR, and we've got George Kittle involved. So a major tight end asset. George Kittle, Devin Singletary, 202, and then a future third. So Singletary maybe taking a hit with J.D. McKissic. I'd love your thoughts on the Bills' backfield as it's currently constructed. That big package with Kittle getting the premium boost for A.J. Brown, 311, and a 23 first for that format.
I'd love to see this pulled because I can't imagine that a side with A.J. Brown and the 2023 first loses ever in a Twitter or YouTube or a Twitter poll, an online poll. The thing about this format is that Kittle can be an absolute game wrecker. Right? He can wreck games where I don't think that's in A.J. Brown's range of outcomes. I think Singletary, people are going to say, hey, his receiving ceiling isn't very good now that J.D. McKissic's there. It wasn't to begin with. He's basically done very little with the routes that he's been given throughout his career, and has been one of the least efficient receiving backs. So it's not a surprise that they get J.D. McKissic in there. So it's interesting. And then you're sort of comparing 202 this year and the pick. How close does that sort of mirror the 2023 first? I mean, as you start sort of playing that, it's still a loss on that. But I think as you start looking at it, I think Kittle's just a dominant piece in this. So I would lean the Kittle side, even though I think you're giving up. I think Twitter would sort of grade the other side as the winner. I think Kittle's just such a game wrecker that I would take him, especially in this format.
I'll do one twist, which is I wonder if you had. I'll do the typical twist we do, which is I wonder if you have the Brown first side, you keep the first, and AJ Brown, could you get Kelsey plus? So I wonder if you have different options. You could, or if you get Darren Waller plus. So I just wonder if you could go a different route. And you could still, because I really like the extra stuff here of having that first, not having 202 or Singletary. I prefer those aspects of it. I agree with what you're saying with Kittle. I just wonder if there's maybe an arbitrage within that of, well, if I don't go after Kittle, maybe I go after someone else in the top 4 or 5 tight ends and kind of get a plus. Because like you said, A.J. Brown carries a lot of, as you mentioned, market and social media cachet.
Yes.
All right, we've got more tight ends on the move here. And 12-team Superflex got only 1.5 for tight ends here in PPR. Noah Fant, Darrell Henderson, and Brandon Cooks for Dallas Goedert, Kadarius Toney, and 206.
Here, testing a lot of allegiances here, Chad. We've moved all over on all of these players, right? So Henderson, we didn't like as a rookie. We've come back to him a little bit more in the second, the second stage of his career, if you will. I'm really high on Goedert as well. I'm Goedert over Fant. Toney, I'm pretty big on. Cooks, I'm big on. So it's a lot of players that I actually have a moving set of values on. I think the upgrade from Fant to Goedert is notable. From just a ceiling perspective, if someone's going to put up a top, 3 finish out of those two, it's almost certainly going to be Goedert. And that matters at tight end, right? Those having that shot is that's a big difference because they stick together. They're pretty close otherwise, right? If someone doesn't have that elite ceiling shot, right, that's a big difference. So I look at that. And I think this is an interesting one to think about. Can you get Brandon Cooks? Like, does Brandon Cooks for 206? Can you pull more than that? Right? Could you get him in other leagues cheaper than that? You might be able to do that. And then you're taking in what I think is a really high upside shot on Kadarius Toney, even though maybe it's low odds. I think it could be a big difference maker. I think that I would take, Jordan from a couple of years ago would probably take the Fant and Cook side on this. Jordan right now, who's just like, hey, let's try and increase our championship equity as much as I can. Give me Goedert and Toney, even though I think Chad might disagree with me on this one.
Well, actually, I helped. One of these is someone that I foster advice towards, and so I helped sculpt this deal. And I'm not gonna say I tried to talk them out of trading Brandon Cooks, but that certainly was something I presented as an option because I know Cooks doesn't carry a lot of market appeal, and so we were kind of discussing, like you mentioned, the difference between Fant and Goedert. I thought Henderson isn't necessarily a throwaway, certainly with his status on that depth chart. So I was able to have them be a little more pushy to get 206 as opposed to a later pick or throwing in a pick of their own, which was pretty much the end game. I probably wouldn't have done it, but I am not quite as rigid in saying that Fant versus Goedert is as big of a spread probably. So I do view it's an upgrade, but I think Fant as a profile, even if you just say, thinking that top 6 or 8 isn't in the outcomes for this year per se, as long as you get that out of maybe your rooting interest, then I think you'll be okay. And Toney is pretty, I think we would take Cooks over Toney over the next 2 years by how many points, if you run that simulation 10 times. So 206, I don't know how much that really moves the needle. So I'm not in love with it. I do think if you think Fant to Goedert, it's only 1.5 though. If you do view that as a big upgrade, I think it's fine. I just was really trying to get them to take Cooks out of that deal in some form or fashion.
Yeah, and I can see why, because he's not drawing, right? He's not drawing what you should on the market because he's going to be.
If people view him wide receiver 35 to 45, I mean, why would you trade him? Because he's going to outproduce that probably, last season, this season, the next season. I mean, All right, we've got one more here, and Cam Akers. He's been one of the big decliners over the past month or so, playing at the end of the year. Bad optics for him coming back from that Achilles in record time to actually, to the play on the field. But 1.5 tight end, and Akers was traded straight up for Darren Waller, fixing a big need position for that team at tight end.
Yeah, I think I like it because I think I take the Waller side. And I think the Waller, a lot of the same things that we talked about at tight end. I think if you have elite ceiling at tight end, there's a big difference between not having that. And so you look at it's really steep. It's a really steep drop at tight end. And I think Waller's still in one of those star categories. And I'm not willing to necessarily put Akers up there yet because, the market is falling on him. I think that there's some signal to that. So I would take the Waller side on this. And admit that this is maybe a Twitter loser again. But I think Waller, you can replicate Akers in a way that I don't think you can replicate a big Waller season. And so I would take Waller because of that.
Yeah. And you think, well, if I just take 3-4 shots at the tight end position, there's still minimal chance if you take guys tight end 10 through 25 that you're going to get a Waller outcome. And yet if you take 3, 4, 5 shots, you can probably Franken committee together some starts that replicate what Akers is doing or will do, even if he is the starter for the Rams and pretty productive. Yeah, those are good points there. We got some quotes from the Footballguys Dynasty Forum this week. Of course, we got to start out by making sure that you're not going to be like your parents. Remember, you hired him. You are not his assistant. So, hey, what got under there? What you got under there? Wrench? Clamps? Anyway. All right. But on the NFL front, we've got sometimes it's not about talent, but roster construction.
Yeah, I agree with that. I totally agree with that, because you can get a lot of, and this is the thing at wide receiver, right? People want to, a young, high upside wide receiver. That is a big time redundancy once you do that 2, 3, 4, 5 times, because the odds are bad, right? And so I think the biggest edge that you can get is having an efficient roster, because it's really tough to pick. I mean, I think we could probably do it better than the market average, but it's really tough to consistently be better than the market at picking players. It's just really tough in a competitive market to do that. Where you can do it is where you have edges, right? Where hey, taking a running back over a wide receiver here is maybe a 10% edge. And you just start stacking those up on your teams. You start stacking them up across multiple teams. And then that's how you become a winner, looking for really successful profiles. I was talking about it earlier this week. Someone was like, well, I need I need an upside quarterback shot because that upside wins. And they were talking about Justin Fields. And I was like, well, if you had traded Justin Fields for Watson or for Herbert or for Allen, right? If you had sort of gone that, you're not taking an upside shot. You have an elite shot, right? And that's just the type of construction that you're making. I think that's a place where there's still a lot of ground that you can do and not be particularly good at picking players, right? So I think that is a huge edge, and I think it's the biggest edge. Spending really a lot of time looking at that is a huge edge instead of trying to pick players.
Yeah, and I think you have to get over the quote unquote winning every trade, because if you're balancing your roster, if you're improving your lineup, that has value beyond whatever trade calculator or raw player value you're putting on those assets in the deal. So, just ask yourself, we mentioned it a couple times on this one. If you're improving from tight end 15 to tight end 3, that probably affects your lineup as opposed to losing Cam Akers or, running back 2, 3, 4 on your team that is frankly in your lineup or on your bench. But when you can tangibly affect your roster and your lineup there in season and for the long haul with a stable asset, it just pays 2-3x dividends beyond what you kind of think the value is. Now is not the time to acquire running backs. It's picks and guys in steady situations.
It probably depends on what range of running back you're talking about. I think that there's a certain level of guys that are particularly susceptible this time of year. So that would be one that I would worry about. And so that would be, trying to pick backups, for example, at this time of year is really tough. But trying to pick guys like David Montgomery, he's got a really sturdy profile. So I think it depends on that. I do think picking, picks, right? If you're in a startup draft, if it's a pick or a player, if you're into the hundreds, right, and you're trying to pick between these couple of wide receivers and the pick, the answer is probably the pick, just because it's flexible, right? You can maybe package it later on to make an upgrade in a more liquid way. So I do think those things at this time of year, having the optionality of picks is valuable, especially right now. We don't know, if you're doing it this week, a lot can change. If a lot can change with, Gabe Davis, for example. If they sign Allen Robinson, if the Bills sign Allen Robinson tomorrow, you think massively different about Gabe Davis, right? And so, having the pick instead of him ensures against that. So I do think it makes a lot of sense this time of year to protect against that.
Yeah, I like what you said. If you're doing a startup draft, the pick versus the player, think about if you would make that trade, and also think about the risk factors between now and obviously we're partway through NFL free agency, but you have the rest and you also have the NFL draft to elude, because if you do not, you are not drafting insulated players, and the picks are insulated because you still don't have to draft all rookies. Your team doesn't have to be 90% 23 and unders. If you get to May and you're actually selecting, you're actually going through your rookie draft, you can still trade those picks. Last one here. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown is a better NFL player than fantasy player, and will settle in the wide receiver 2-3 range, glut of wide receivers that you can find rather easily.
I mean, that's probably true about a lot of people. And I think that is a statement that could be applied to a lot of people that the Dynasty community likes. So I would just kind of generally agree with that. And I think it's a really difficult range to sort of pick players. However, that being said, like, let's not just, I think and I've got on this soapbox before, we really discount what he did last year. And I understand that TJ Hawkinson didn't play, and I understand that DeAndre Swift didn't play. By the way, when Amon-Ra St. Brown broke out, by the way, TJ Hawkinson wasn't setting the world afire before he went out either, right? And then Amon-Ra St. Brown sort of stepped in the second half of his rookie season as a day 3 pick, and had a huge end of the season, right? I mean, he was a top 10 wide receiver for a stretch at the end of the season, overall, right? They're not even talking about the rookie class. We're talking about overall. So does he maybe settle in that range? Maybe, probably. But I would say this, don't just discount him. And I've seen people doing it this week, like, oh, look at the splits with him and Hawkinson on the field. Like, he already had like a 15% target share or some crazy thing like that with Hawkinson already on the field, right? It was 14 or 15% as a day 3 rookie. I mean, we're just kind of like whistling past the graveyard on like, oh, look at this huge performance that he had. Again, but bringing in DJ Chark, I mean, is DJ Chark better than Amon-Ra St. Brown? I mean, I haven't seen proof of it recently. And I'm not usually Mr. Day 3 wide receiver, but I think we kind of discount a lot of the advanced stuff on Amon-Ra St. Brown as a rookie was excellent. And does he have maybe top 10 overall Dynasty wide receiver ceiling? I mean, he'd basically have to do what he did again last year. I think that's probably asking a lot. But could he sort of settle in that range? I mean, we talked about it. Like, I don't know, what's a better bet, him or Rashad Bateman? I mean, I don't know. We've seen it from Amon-Ra St. Brown. And listen, if all that opportunity was there, right, no one else seized it. And if we put you out there, you wouldn't have done it, right? I wouldn't have done it, right? So we just, people are like, hey, he had this great opportunity. You can't just put, Zay Jones had a great opportunity in Buffalo too, and he didn't do anything with it, right? I mean, there's all these guys that you could say that about that haven't done it. Amon-Ra St. Brown did. And I mean, I root for the guy, even though I probably won't have a ton of them on my team.
Yeah, I think one thing you said that I wanted to double down on, which is you kind of talked about range of outcomes. And I think one of the problems is, if you are statically projecting something, I project this player at running back 8, I project this player at wide receiver 32. I think that's a mistake. Like, if you do the numbers part, I think you have to be open to range of outcomes. And you've said it before with draft picks, or, when you start dissenting from NFL opinion and all these things, that you need to be open to being wrong, and being wrong both directions. What if I'm high on a player? You might not be high enough. What if you're down on a player and you should be high on the player? Like, so you need to be open to all these probability shifts. And so for Amon-Ra St. Brown, yes, I mean, in my modeling and valuation system, he has probabilities to get to wide receiver 1. He also has probabilities to basically be a one-hit wonder, if you will, or basically not be as good as he was last year for the rest of his career. I mean, so I have all that built in, and it all goes together into one final number. But you need to be open to, what if, this is the beginning of a trend? What if this is the beginning of a strong production? What if he is a Stephon Diggs-like player from day 3 that was underdrafted by the NFL? It does happen. He was a productive player in college. But also, if you're super high on him, you have to realize, all right, day 3, how much of allegiance is he going to have? Yes, he's on the success track, but what'd they do? They brought in a notable name, even if he wasn't highly productive or healthy last year. DJ Chark, you figure there's going to be more health, there's going to be more pedigree around him. They're not projected to be the strongest passing game. Yeah, there's negative factors as well, but it all comes together, and that's why I think this quote is he is stuck in the middle. He's stuck in that middle of about 20, 30 wide receivers, where some of them are going to break out, and a decent number of them in 18 months are going to be a relic of what they were at this point in time, which is officially interesting. You mentioned Gabe Davis and a few others that they may fall to the wayside and be largely unvaluable by the time we get to 2024. And just so you have to kind of know all of that. And that's why you might not want 5 Amon-Ra St. Browns on your roster. That might be the biggest takeaway. If you want to make an exception and say, I believe in Gabe Davis, I believe in Amon-Ra St. Brown, how about you have one guy like that? Don't have 6 wide receivers on your team and 3 of them are like this. That may be one of the bigger roster construction takeaways here to close on Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah, and that harkens back to what we said about the construction, right? It's really tough. I mean, the difference between wide receiver 10 and wide receiver 35, I mean, you could order those 30 different ways. I could come back each day and be like, it's tough to really argue with this. And I think that's 100% true that you just sort of wrap that back in. Hey, we do have a little bit of breaking news, by the way. Baker Mayfield with a statement, no official trade yet, but Baker Mayfield with a statement thanking Cleveland for the last 4 years. He does say, quote, "This is not a message with hidden meaning." However, I know a lot of people are going to read into the hidden meaning of it, considering that as we sit here right now, it has been reported that Cleveland has met or is currently meeting with Deshaun Watson in Houston about a potential trade. So for what that's worth, do you have any guess on where Watson lands, by the way? I don't know if I just influenced
based on what you just read. Yeah, my first thought was Amari Cooper for the win. As that looked super sneaky, and then it could turn awesome. But who thanks? I don't thank my wife and my dog because I'm staying. like that's not you thank the teller at the bank. You thank the person that checks you out at the grocery store. Thanks everybody. Good night. Like you don't. I just. So yeah, and again, that is a Watson team that he has met with, which I'll say 48 hours, 72 hours of Deshaun Watson has been a lot of fun to track the visits and who's interested and what could the Saints possibly pay for Deshaun Watson? How are they going to make those numbers work? Is he going to have an offensive line? Like all these things. But it doesn't seem like he's on the move, and I'm not surprised that something came out of at least, let's follow this rabbit hole a little deeper with regard to Watson, who frankly, I think that's the most interesting thing left. Actually, to close, I mean, you mentioned Allen Robinson, you mentioned Leonard Fournette, and I guess, Deshaun Watson would be the third piece. Is there anybody else that's sort of right on the tip of your dynasty tongue in terms of, I want to see what the result is here?
I mean, Watson's the big shoe. I mean, we have a ton of Fournette, right? Those two guys, I have a ton of exposure to on my team. So those are big. Those are really big players. I think Jarvis Landry is really interesting because if you sort of look at his stat profile, it hasn't really gone down. It's just a volume concern, which kind of is a problem with Amari Cooper, right? That's kind of the same problem. They don't throw the ball that much, but I still think he has stuff to offer. And so if you put him aside Stephon Diggs in Buffalo, or if you put him on the opposite side of Tyreek Hill in Kansas City, all of a sudden you have this guy who's in the 30s or the 40s or the 50s, depending on what draft you're in, that all of a sudden is looking like a high-end wide receiver too, just because the volume's a lot more, or I don't think the skill is eroded as much as necessarily the stat profile is eroded, just because of some of the problems with the Cleveland offense. So he's one that I have a fair amount of that I'm still watching. Allen Robinson, Juju is another one. And I find it really fascinating that this market has gone after guys like DJ Shark, like Christian Kirk, paying high, like the biggest contract this year is Christian Kirk. And it's funny because you're going to see, and actually I think, just to hit another one, I think the Mitchell Trubisky, we were talking about it in the staff chat. I think the Mitchell Trubisky contract it's why the Pittsburgh Steelers are constantly good, right? Because you take a very low risk bet and you say, listen, like there's no commitment. You just compare that to the bet that the Colts made last year, right? And where they gave up a first, they paid him 3 times that much money. And then they had to trade him because they're stuck with him, right?
Well, Washington trading picks and taking double the salary on Mitch Trubisky, and then they have nothing beyond this year. Trubisky's half the cost, and they have control for 2 years.
And like, if he's good, they have a huge excess value the next 2 years, right? In terms of, hey, look at all the guys we can put around him because we're only paying him $14 million after 2 years.
And Wentz they would have to re-sign.
Right. Yes. And it's the same thing with Jimmy G. Like, would you rather have Mitchell Trubisky right now or Jimmy G? 100% Mitchell Trubisky at that number because you're paying him, a fraction of what you'd pay Garoppolo. It's a brilliant, brilliant deal. And it doesn't preclude you from, like, if someone falls to you in the draft, you can still take him, right? If someone falls to you next year in the draft, if Trubisky's not good, you can cut him. If someone falls to you in the draft next year, you can take him. It has precluded you from doing nothing. This is the ultimate two-way go. We look at basketball a lot. This is a really way to think about your dynasty team in terms of how to build it, right? Think about making bets like this where, hey, this is an upside shot, but it doesn't preclude me from taking other upside shots, right? It's trading, a second instead of giving a first. Right now, I still have the liquidity of the first I can use later. Those types of things. I think is the best deal in all of free agency, even if it doesn't work out, because I think, it's just the ceiling of it and the risk of it. It's just, there's such a huge spread between the two. It's just an awesome deal.
Yeah, the two things I'm watching kind of situationally is are those number 2 spots for Kansas City and Buffalo. I want to see if Jarvis Landry goes there or if it's Will Fuller, Juju, Allen Robinson. There's a bunch of guys that could benefit, but those have been 2 spots we've seen big fantasy productive in the past, or would at least be highly interesting. And then the other one is, as we've been watching the Melvin Gordon situation, he's still out there, but Denver, are they going to bring in a running back? Will Javonte Williams go the way of A.J. Dillon, or will he be what we thought A.J. Dillon might be 12 months ago before Aaron Jones was brought back? So Gordon is out there, Fournette. I even think Ronald Jones, Rashad Penny, some of these guys impacted enough that you got to get that hyper assumptive running back 2-3 in dynasty overall on Javonte Williams market value. That's just going to explode in people's faces. He's a good player, but to say that he's automatically going to be one of the most dominant players and pull Jonathan Taylor, he basically has to be 2021 Jonathan Taylor to have this pay off. So I think those are the 2 situations I'm kind of monitoring, still left situationally here to go in the coming days. Hopefully that gets resolved, but you never know with running backs.
Hey, one question for you before we log off. If you're doing a startup draft right now, how many quarterbacks are you taking ahead of Deshaun Watson?
Oh, great question. I know. Yeah. He's getting close to the top 10, right? He's kind of venturing back into that zone. I have him at 7. I would probably take him in a draft in that, probably 6-7 kind of range. Yeah. So, I know that's still 3, 4, 5 spots ahead of ADP, but I think the moment he plays, he's going to be back much closer to 6-7.
Yeah. I think right in that range is, I would have trouble passing at him at 5, 5 or 6, depending on the exact order who goes in front of him.
Yeah. I think the controversial one might be for me is I have Watson over Lamar Jackson. So that would probably be the one that was the most, sticky for people. I would ask you this. What do you remember as the low point? Was it QB 16, 17 for Deshaun Watson, the absolute low point?
108 in rookie drafts.
Okay. It was like it was like later last
behind
summer
Mac Jones. Right.
Yeah. Right, okay. Anything memorable? Yeah, behind Mac Jones. That was the one. Right. That'll do it.
Yeah.
Do it. I don't know. But you're like, I saw 10 spots below Jalen Hurts. I remember that one. Startup draft.
Yeah.
Roger got that one. All right. A lot of good stuff in this episode with Jordan McNamara. We talked about Amon-Ra St. Brown. Got to talk a little freelance there with free agents to close the show. I think Dallas Goedert was constructive. George Kittle, Saquon Barkley in some of the trades. And, of course, shout out to one of our favorite players, James Conner, from years ago, being productive and still getting the love. And like you mentioned, big, basically his first big contract in the NFL. So well-deserved. Mr. James Conner out of the free agency period. I am Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your dynasty leagues.